While pleading for money, I discovered casino receipts in my parents' car after working 80 hours a week and paying them half. When I was in junior high, my physics teacher got me pregnant with his daughter's chemotherapy, assured me that we would travel the world together because we were in love. But the day I went up to him with the two pink lines, despite accepting a $100,000 payment from the school, he never came back, and my parents stated that I was prohibited from sharing this information in exchange for signing a contract. After 9 years, I'm making ends meet by working as a nurse during the day and cleaning offices at night. I sent my parents almost half of my wage each month because they said they couldn't survive off of their pensions because of rent, utilities, and groceries. While I was foregoing meals to allow my 8-year-old daughter Laya to eat, I was also paying medical copays and other bills. Speaking about Laya, she became quite ill, and the doctor determined that she had a severe kind of leukemia that needed immediate. I visited my parents for treatment, because even with insurance, the medication alone would cost hundreds of dollars each month. To help me pay for Laya's therapy, I explained the situation and requested if they may temporarily reduce the money I was sending them. At that point, they revealed the shocking information. They seated me in their living room, their eyes calculating and icy, and told me that if they would tell her entire extended family about her father if I took away even a single dollar of their support. Disclose every detail of my high school experiences, claiming to have protected my reputation as a word. I completely dismantled the idea that I owed them for their quiet for years. It was devastating for my family when Laya learned that her father, who was also my teacher, had deserted us. Found that I had been tricked and exploited as a child, I would face humiliation and perhaps excommunication. Therefore, I removed to continue paying my parents while attempting to handle Ila's expenses, I maxed out my credit cards and took out a payday loan secured by my car, medical bills, but that wasn't enough. Because of the medication delays, Laya's condition worsened. I was working 80 hours a week with little sleep, missing school frequently, and losing weight. My parents were always requested additional funding, claiming that their costs were rising, and they even recommended that I take out a second mortgage. Laya needed to be sent to the hospital after falling at school one evening while I was seated I was so exhausted and anxious that a social worker in the hospital waiting room started to inquire as to why Laya's therapy was inconsistent, that I almost broke down there, which is when I found the receipts. I used my parents' car to get to the hospital when mine malfunctioned, and I found meal receipts from fancy restaurants while sorting through some rubbish. Movie tickets and casino parking stubs from the previous month when they said they were unable to pay for food started an inquiry. One afternoon, I followed them and saw them enter a casino. I took notes on everything, including the while my child was dying. They were living opulently off of my money through gaming and shopping trips, but when I confronted them, despite the evidence, they didn't try to deny it. Instead, they intensified the blackmail by threatening to contact I was accused of being an unsuitable mother by child services, and they threatened to cancel my nursing license by saying that I was unstable. They threatened to ruin me completely unless I turned up the ownership to my home. That's when I sensed something crumble within, when I realized they had been purposefully damaging my life for years by stealing funds meant to cover my pain and utilized it to sustain their way of life. Then they used the same trauma for almost 10 years to deceive me, so I started recording our conversations and gathered all the proof of their financial wrongdoing. I became a skilled online investigator since I couldn't afford a lawyer and found out what they were doing after engaging in illegal financial exploitation, extortion, and other activities. I invited all of my relatives, uncles, and cousins, who had spent years complimenting my parents on their I played the recordings during the family gathering, and my wonderful grandparents criticized me for taking their help. I showed the documents at the meeting and explained how they had been using funds meant for Laya's medical care to feed their addiction to gambling, after which I informed them of the fact that my parents received $100,000 as part of the school settlement. To remain silent regarding a teacher who had sexually assaulted their daughter, they had hidden and squandered funds while pressuring The gathering fell hushed as my Aunt Mary Ann was the first to tell them that her daughter had to work, herself to the bone to maintain them. She only shook her head and repeated no again and over, and my Uncle Gerald got up. My cousin Nana started crying, and the quiet seemed to continue for hours as he got up and left without saying anything. Probably just a few minutes later, my mother began talking, saying I was lying when she said that I was experiencing a mental breakdown as a result of stress, and she told everyone about my father promptly supported her, saying they had been worried about me since she had been being erratic and making stuff up. He claimed that I had neglected Laya for months, and they were thinking of calling child services directly. Pulled out my phone and listened to another audio. 2 days prior, they had threatened to take away my nursing. My mother's voice was clear when she told me to continue paying for my license, or else she would ensure that I never worked in the medical field again. Some of my family started to react differently to the proof, even though it was right in front of me. According to Aunt Elaine, I was simply stressed out and misread things, so Uncle Malcolm proposed that we I could see it happen years of my parents being the perfect grandparents were working when I took a break and talked about it later. They had accumulated a great deal of goodwill against me, but I was always the suffering single mother in need of help. The only one who appeared to fully believe me was my cousin Tessa, who approached me and put her hand on my shoulder. She whispered that although she had always questioned how my parents made their money, most of the family was already on their side. They were too shocked to comprehend what I was saying, or maybe they just refused to accept it. And my mother broke down in tears, saying she claimed that all they had ever done was try to help, and that she couldn't believe her own daughter would attack her in this manner. The meeting ended with my father putting his arm around her and staring at me while calling me impatient and ungrateful. Nothing was settled, so half of the family departed without bidding me farewell, while the other half muttered that they needed some time to. Considering that Tessa was the only one left, she said she believed me and would assist however she could. But I could tell I came home that evening feeling worse than before because she was so overwhelmed by everything. I had thought that the truth would release me, but it seemed like I had exacerbated the situation. Leela was still in the hospital, and I still hadn't. I didn't have to wait long because the following morning I had the money for her therapy and my parents were going to take revenge. My hospital supervisor called to inform me that they had received a concerning report about me. I recognized the caller who said I was stealing medications and showing signs of mental instability. My boss immediately told me that I would have to take a leave of absence while they looked into it. Parents. I tried to explain why my primary source of income had abruptly disappeared, but she said it was routine and there were no charges needed to be looked into. She seemed kind, but she was powerless. Hung up and sat in disbelief since I couldn't afford our rent, let alone Laya's medical care without my nursing job. When I called the cleaning company to see if I could take on more shifts, they told me they were completely booked. I spent the rest of the day applying for jobs online, but I came to the conclusion that any background check would be useless. Disclosed that my former employer was looking into me. My parents had skillfully played their cards that afternoon. Visited Laya at the hospital. She seemed so tiny in her bed, so I asked when she may be able to go home. Soon after, as I was fighting back tears, the doctor drew me aside and said they needed to discuss her treatment plan. Stated that the delays were creating problems, and he asked if there were any financial concerns they should be mindful of. I wanted to tell him everything, but I just nodded and said I'd work things out when I saw my parents leaving. My mother grinned as they visited Laya in the hospital lobby and pretended to be worried grandparents. She questioned me icily whether I had changed my mind about their offer of the house. I ignored her and simply passed them. I heard my father telling a nurse how worried they were about me and how I seemed to be before I left for my automobile. They had already set up the structure to make me seem unstable that night when Tessa called, and I was crumbling under the tension. She said she had been considering helping and offered to lend me some money, but I knew she didn't. She was a teacher and a single mother. I praised her, but I told her that this was not yet her struggle. She insisted on making some sort of contribution, saying she had begun looking through old family pictures and I had low expectations, but I respected her because she believed she would be able to find records that would support my account. The next few days passed quickly as I sold everything I could. Jewelry, my TV, and a few pieces of furniture weren't nearly enough. I went to the hospital billing department to start her next cycle of treatment as soon as possible, but I couldn't afford it, and begged for additional time. They set up a payment schedule, but claimed that treatment couldn't start without I was forced to pay at least half up front. So I went back to my parents after finding them seated in the living room as though nothing had happened, and I told them that Laya would die if she wasn't treated. My mother looked at me with a beaming smile and stated that they had been whatever they wanted as long as they let me use the money to cover her medical bills. Considering my situation, she stated that they would assist with Laya's treatment, but only if I openly apologized to the family for misrepresenting them and I gave them my house, which was only Yayla and me at the time. Had it been for our protection, but what choices did I have? I accepted the conditions as I signed, my father produced documentation he had already prepared, and my mother called other family members on. She compelled me to acknowledge that I was confused and apologized over the loudspeaker for my outburst during the family meeting, and anxious, and every word felt like poison in my mouth since I had told terrible lies about my parents, who I loved. However, after I had finished humiliating myself, they gave me a check for just one treatment. They said they would give me more when I left the residence, and they wanted me gone in 30. I paid the hospital that afternoon after accepting the check and leaving, and Laya received treatment that evening, but I knew that was just the beginning. My parents had turned most of my family against me after winning this round. They stole my house and cost me my job, but at least Laya would. Tessa called that evening, ecstatic, and said that she had survived, which was all that counted. We decided to meet after she found something intriguing in ancient family documents that she wanted to show me in person. I wasn't brave enough to expect that she might find something useful in a coffee shop the following day. Was a kind of retaliation, but I knew my parents would not give up because they had too much to lose now that they had come clean. Their actual selves and will stop at nothing to keep their secret. Our dispute has just recently. The next morning, when I first met Tessa at the coffee shop, the place was essentially deserted save for a few early risers. She was hunched over their laptops, a manila folder full of documents shielding her eyes from her chest. Slid into the booth across from me and spoke after flashing across the room, looking at every face before resting on mine. Bank statements from previous years were contained in the folder, which she silently pushed across the cracked wooden table. My parents' bank statements from shortly after the event showed yellowing along the edges, but the numbers were still apparent. While clearing up old crates in her mother's attic, Settlement Tessa discreetly described how she found them. Apparently, that year, when everyone trusted my parents with the documents, my Aunt Mary Ann helped them with their taxes, showed the $100,000 deposit that was made just 2 weeks after my 18th birthday, but more importantly, they disclosed the location of the funds, and within 6 months, almost everything was vanished. Casino withdrawals, 40 shopping trips at upscale department stores just a short distance away, and a lavish Caribbean cruise they had spent my settlement money before I had received my high school diploma. I looked at the documents and felt nauseous. As I traced the transactions with my finger, the coffee I had ordered sat there getting cold. Over the years, they made me feel awful about needing help and accusing me of being unappreciative when I had trouble making payments. Yet they had wasted funds that were supposed to support my future because of my trauma, the therapy I never got, and the education I had to. Tessa said there was more, so she pulled out another document and handled it carefully, treating it as though it were evidence at a murder scene. It was a letter to my parents from the school's attorney, even after. So the official stationery, which was immaculate for many years, clearly and legally stated the settlement stipulations. Originally, the money was reserved specifically for my upbringing, education, and future needs, but my parents broke the deal by investing in themselves. I used my phone to take pictures of everything, and my hands shook a little as I tried. To take crisp pictures in the dim coffee shop lighting, I at last had concrete proof, not simply of their Tessa pledge to preserve the original in a safety deposit in response to both the present extortion and their prior betrayal, box that her mother didn't know about. And she added that her mother, Mary Ann, was starting to inquire about my. Mary Ann reportedly observed many inconsistencies in their parents' tale, including dates that did not. After thanking Tessa, I returned home to gather my belongings, including the bills and match they claimed to have but didn't have. My thoughts were racing after learning that I had less than 30 days to find Laya and myself a new place to live and pay the rent. Our neighborhood's market was highly competitive, but first I had to determine how to strategically implement this new, knowing that my parents had already tainted the well, so I couldn't just call another family get-together. Most of my family were lying against me, so I needed a different strategy that they wouldn't anticipate. The hospital billing department called me that afternoon, and the woman on the line appeared remorseful but strong, claiming that there was a problem with the check my parents gave me. It bounced, and the money was not accepted. When Laya's therapy was once more put on hold, I felt sick to my stomach and called my parents right away. When my mother answered the phone after her fingers fumbled on the third ring, she replied, "It must be a bank error." They might fix it tomorrow or the following day, but I could hear the hardly concealed delight in her voice. Was intentional. I drove to their house and beat them up as retaliation for not signing over the house promptly enough, on the door until my knuckles hurt. And my father's response was to cover the doorway with his body so I couldn't enter. Said that I was acting irrationally and theatrically as usual, and he threatened to call the police if I didn't stop, and accuse me of harassing. I informed him that Laya needed the treatment and that his life was difficult without it. I heard the locks turn shut as he closed the door in my face and shrugged, as though we were discussing the weather. I sat in my car shaking with anger and my whole body shivering as I left the house that I had helped pay for. We're playing with the health of a sick child by using my daughter's life as a negotiating chip. I contacted Tessa and told her what had happened while trying to speak steadily, and she said she would talk to her about it. Mother, right now, Mary Ann, might convince my parents to cease this crazy behavior, but I knew it wouldn't. My parents were overly obsessed with their own power and gave priority to controlling their. I couldn't sleep that night because I couldn't stop thinking about my granddaughter's life. I kept thinking about those bank records and the figures that showed how they had taken my future and were now stealing Laya's by morning. I had decided if they wanted to play because the crews they took were more expensive than Isla's whole course of treatment. I began by phoning each relative who had attended the family meeting, and I spoke with them in a worried tone. Instead of using an angry tone, I didn't directly blame my parents. Instead, despite all of my help, they seemed to be having financial difficulties, so I voiced my concern for them. Challenges. I suggested that they might have a gambling problem and needed help because I had observed them at the casino numerous times. The rumors started to circulate right away about my Aunt Elaine. Within an hour, I spoke with my Aunt Mary Ann, who shared that she had found some old financial documents that were problematic. It wasn't quite what I stated at the time, but the family was soon talking about my parents' possible gambling addiction meeting. But it was close enough for people to believe that my parents tried to control the harm, but the seed had been. When doubt creeps in, it's hard to get rid of. So I went one step further and called the casino, where after taking a picture of them, I worried about my old parents' gambling problem and asked whether there was any way to find out how much they had spent there. The casino was unable to give details because of privacy regulations, but they did verify that my parents were frequent customers. The woman on the phone appeared worried, so I set this up. Within 2 days, my cousin Mason overheard every word in the kitchen as he was there to see how Laya was doing. The family's story had shifted significantly. Instead of believing I was crazy and unappreciative, people were My mother called me and yelled so loudly that I had to put the phone aside because she was worried about my parents' gambling habits. She said in my ear that I was spreading horrible things to ruin their name and that I would tell Laya everything. I recorded the call on my laptop right away in order to turn my daughter against me. After I played it for Tessa, she played it for her mother Marianne, who finally started to realize the truth. Although my disguise was slipping, my parents weren't done yet. The following day, they tried to check at Laya's school. I had forgotten that they were taking her to a doctor's appointment, so they informed the staff they were taking her out early. I went over breaking numerous traffic laws and discovered them. But fortunately, the school followed the procedure and called me first, narrating in the principal's office how worried she was about grandparents who only wished to assist me had to present the primary court documents demonstrating my exclusive custody after my parents left, but not before my mother suggested that it wasn't because her breath at 10 a.m. smelt like booze. I knew the person before the social worker did when they called child services and accused me of medical neglect that night. The social worker showed in the following morning with a clipboard and a serious expression on my face explaining why she was there, to show her Yayla's whole medical history, including all of her examinations and prescriptions, and to explain why I mentioned financial difficulties and family issues, but I was unable to inform her about the extortion because treatments were delayed. Concerns? She seemed content but said she would have to follow up on another item to add to my extending their list of potential ways to hurt us. Tessa called to provide an update while the social worker was still Marianne. Her mother had questioned my parents over the earlier bank statements they had tried to lie initially, then repeatedly changed their story. But Marianne had the proof in black, and after my parents finally admitted spending money, she informed them that she knew about the settlement money. Marianne did not purchase it since she knew they had been well at the time, but they needed money for bills and medical expenses. Was starting to recognize their true selves behind the protective parent facade, and the next day I got in my stomach dropped when I received an unexpected call from my former cleaning company stating that they had received multiple accusations from a client who said I stole expensive office supplies after work. I realized right away that my parents were responsible, trying to ruin whatever opportunities I might have had to work even though there was no evidence that they couldn't risk it. My employer said they had to let me go while an inquiry was conducted. Keeping me on company policy, I was out of choices and once again unemployed. Laya's treatment is on hold. I'm likely to lose my house, and I'm unemployed soon. I decided to take a chance because I shared my tale alone in a local neighborhood Facebook group that night without naming my parents. I inquired if anyone knew of any mother-sick children who had been extorted by relatives who had previously taken from me, resources that could be useful. In a matter of hours, the post became viral in our little community, and hundreds of comments poured in. My parents read the message, with some offering support and others sharing similar tales of familial betrayal. They were furious within hours, and my father showed up at my house at 11 p.m. He said I was embarrassing the family by airing it, so I refused to open the door and asked that I take it down. When I told him they were killing their grandchild in public while wearing filthy linen, he actually laughed, and the sound carried over. He remarked at the door that Laya was fine, but a little ill, and that I was acting dramatic as usual, so I realized that they were more concerned with their power and prestige than they were with her death, and they had never loved her. I recorded him saying everything through the door, and once I updated my Facebook post with the audio, I heard back from the community. Was quick and overpowering, and some individuals recognized my parents in their wrath. Others started piecing together the details based on the description and their personal interactions with my parents. The next morning, Laya woke up with a 103 dig. But they still had one card to play as their fabricated reputation started to fall apart. Without treatment, her temperature was dropping and her frail body could no longer resist. So I hurried her. My parents arrived as I was shaking hands and finishing up in the hospital while carrying her because she was too weak to walk. Then they publicly revealed to everyone in the family that they had brought additional family members along as witnesses. They offered to cover everything in the waiting area, but I was too arrogant and refused their help. Angry, my Uncle Gerald supported them, saying he had seen me turn down their significant offer. The other patients looked at me disapprovingly, and I was too tired to resist. So I concentrated on Laya clutching her hand while she lay in the hospital bed. The doctor said that I pleaded with the billing department to provide her with urgent care because her numbers were fast declining, for assistance, and was prepared to sign anything at this point. But a woman came up to me and said she had seen my Facebook page. After working for a neighborhood group that helped families with medical bills, she recommended that they pay for them. I sobbed while in the hospital during Isla's treatment until we were able to resolve the situation, and I was powerless to stop them. In an effort to intervene, my parents told the charity worker that I was dishonest and mentally ill. However, she had already completed her research and was aware of everything, including the investigation and my job loss. Observed that stories about my parents had been shared by others. It seems that they had a reputation for taking exploiting individuals with little loans that were never paid back and heartwarming tales that didn't fit the charity's mission approved Laya's treatment that day, and the relief was so great that Laya improved right away. The right medications made a substantial impact. Her color improved in a matter of hours. But my folks weren't done yet. They started phoning relatives to tell them I publicly embarrassed them because they said I was taking charity instead of family support. The family was divided into groups because some family members thought they were malicious, while others started to doubt their account. As the Christmas season drew near, Tessa's mother, Mary Ann, did something out of the blue and called her at her own family get-together. She said she had important information to share about the future of the family, including my parents. Tried to decline, but Mary Ann stressed that she would provide the information even if they didn't arrive. They were forced to go, and I was invited as well. But I was afraid the final time had not gone smoothly, and the thought made my hands shake. However, Tessa persuaded me to go by claiming that her mother had been after weeks of independent research. She found more than just bank statements, so I went and took Laya. She was still weak but stable with me, and I wanted the family to see. The repercussions of their contempt for the majority of the family attended the meeting at Mary Ann's house. Curious about what was Mary Ann started by showing the bank statements on a projector that showed the tension in the room. She meticulously reviewed each transaction and then provided an explanation of the settlement money. Shocked me by revealing that she had found old emails between my parents from just after the settlement they were agreeing on. How to use the funds to plan shopping excursions, vacations, and lottery-winning laughter. One communication from my mother stated that I was young and would get help while their teenage daughter was dealing with trauma. My parents attempted to flee, but Mary Ann wasn't done. She had also found records in the quiet room. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 10 years and years' worth of gaming losses that originates from me. She called the casino and obtained printouts of their loyalty, which should have gone to Laya. Program status. They received free lodging and food as VIP members, and Mary Ann then showed everyone She read comments from people my parents had, borrowed money from in response to a Facebook post and the community's reaction, but never reimbursed tales of deceit and deception from years ago, she said. She expressed guilt for not recognizing it sooner and apologized to me in front of everyone, saying the family had failed Laya and me, and when she spoke, her voice broke. My parents tried to defend. However, the overwhelming evidence led my mother to blame my father for the gambling and my father to blame my mother. Years of secrets were exposed as a result of the lies they told against one another in public, including how before the settlement they had been broken, and they saw it as a chance to live the life they wanted, and how they defended it by saying, I was still young and healthy. My mother said that she never imagined I would amount to anything. My cousin Na started crying, saying she had a suspicion. Although I didn't want to accept it, my Uncle Malcolm came up to my parents and called them repulsive. The truth had finally come out, and it was more repulsive than anyone could have imagined. One by one, family members turned away from them. Had anticipated, but my parents tried one more prank on my mother. Looked at Laya and apologized for being ill, then turned to face me and remarked, "If I had simply been a better, none of this would have occurred, daughter." She claimed that I was selfish and made them take harsh measures. Measures. She made a sincere effort to hold me accountable for their wrongdoings, at which point Laya said, "My silent sick, the child, who believed I was the greatest mother in the world and worked, looked at her grandmother and said, 'She's mean.'" Her voice was small but clear as she adamantly declared every day that she no longer wanted to see them. Family members started screaming at my parents, calling them monsters, and saying they were dead when the room erupted. After realizing they had lost the family, my parents departed Moran's home to a yell of denunciation. But they had lost their revenue and reputation, so I knew they wouldn't give up lightly. They would look for revenge. They always had the last word. I was right. The next day, they lodged a grievance with the I had mental health issues, according to the nursing board, which made me unsuitable to practice. They produced declarations, asserting that I had shown signs of instability and threatened them, and it was their last attempt to ruin my career. But this time I was ready since I had witnesses and recordings. And a nonprofit willing to attest to the fact that I had learnt to record every detail of the inquiry challenging, but Mary Ann and Tessa provided testimony on my behalf, and the charity worker provided records of my parents. Even some of my other relatives wrote me letters of support for the nursing staff in an attempt to impede Laya's therapy. Board found no evidence of misconduct, my license was cleared, and I was allowed to resume work after my boss expressed regret, and quickly offered me a job return with a small boost to make up for the inconvenience. But the damage to my parents were persistent and swift, and word swiftly got out in our little town that their friends had stopped. When they found out about the theft and Laya's status, they called their church and were told to leave. They became outcasts overnight once the casino blacklisted them. They called me several times, but I did. Laya continued her treatment without interruption, and they didn't have anything further to frighten me with. When I recovered, family members who had been waiting started to help as well, and Charity took care of everything. Saying that my parents had borrowed money from her years prior, Mary Ann gave me money and volunteered to watch me so that I could work extra hours. And Tessa helped me locate a small apartment that fit our budget. It wasn't much, but it belonged to us and was immovable. The house situation was troublesome because I had provided my signature under Robert Franklin. Mary Ann's husband was a retired real estate agent. Found errors in the paperwork my parents had filled out. They had filed it incorrectly in their hurry. My parents found out that the transfer was invalid and that I still owned my house, so they threatened to sue. But who would take their case? They were out of money, had no credibility, and the threat was meaningless. We rejoiced when the doctor reported that Laya had responded well to ongoing treatment and that she was in remission months later. Several Facebook friends and family members who had helped us joined us for a small celebration at our house. I felt like we had a real support system for the first time in years, thanks to my pals. But my parents weren't invited, so I heard they'd moved to a small apartment on the other side of town, where they were making ends meet with minimal wage employment. Put me through years, and sometimes karma returns. They tried to get in touch with Ela. I sent Laya a card with money inside for her birthday, and she chucked it. "People who hurt others don't deserve it," she said, throwing it in the trash without opening it. Forgiving. Astute child. She most likely learned that by experiencing so much at such an early age. Yet we were both healing after learning about my parents' extended family members. Some family members felt terrible for them, but they were excommunicated and not allowed to attend holidays or family get-togethers. Most people believed they had caused it themselves, but the family came together to support Laya and me. It took nearly losing everything to discover what we really needed, a family that cared, and the support we had always earned. Regarding us, I occasionally worry about whether my parents regret their actions if they ever consider how things could have turned out differently. Have been, but then I remember how their eyes were full with joy on the day they threatened me, despite their icy faces, since they think they have me trapped. But they simply regret being discovered and losing both their source of income, and people like this never do. But their reputation shows that they have no remorse for harming their daughter and grandchildren. We overcame them. Laya recovered, and I was able to return to my job. We maintained our house and found the people who genuinely cared about us. It was expensive, but the freedom was worth it because there were no more dangers. We desperately needed simply Laya and no more money handling or deception. 6 months later, we were at last free, and I was living our lives without their greed pulling us down. After everything had finally calmed down, Laya was doing well in her therapy and had even resumed playing soccer. I was back at work full-time and had even taken on some overtime, so I was able to purchase food and we were making up on payments. Without first looking at my money account, my parents tried a lawyer, informed me in writing that my parents were challenging the house documents I had allegedly promised to them verbally. The letter was from a low-cost attorney who probably stole the house, and they wanted me to uphold that deal. Their case for a small cost, but I wasn't even concerned since I had Franklin, Moran's husband, on my side, and he was quiet. He said that their complaint was baseless and would be resolved quickly because he was educated about property law. But my desperate people started to arrive, cornering me in the produce section of the grocery store where my mother works. Started crying as she talked about how difficult their lives were and how my father said I had destroyed them because of a miscommunication. They followed me around the store until security made them leave, after which they showed up at Laya's school once more, and this time the administrator called the police, warning them not to trespass. One afternoon, Tessa called to let me know that she had heard something strange about my parents while at the bank. We're attempting to obtain a loan using my house as security, and they claimed to have ownership records when the bank clerk shut them down since they couldn't produce enough documents showing that they were in dire need of money and options. So this time I decided to take the initiative and went to the police station to submit a report about the harassment. The police said they couldn't do anything without using physical threats, but he suggested that I record everything and think about getting a restraining order if things got out of hand. I started carrying a little notebook with me everywhere. I went whenever I saw them or tried to get in touch with them, noting the time and date in my journal. The family was still split over my parents. Despite everything, Aunt Elaine felt terrible for them, saying they were older and had made errors. She tried to convince me to lend them a hand a bit. I brought up Laya's hospital stay, the returned check, and the years of extortion. After that, she stopped asking, but I had a suspicion that she was giving them money on the side. That was her choice. In a recent letter, the parents' attorney claimed that I had caused mental distress by turning the family against them, damaged their reputation, and demanded compensation. Franklin. When he read it, he laughed and called it the most ridiculous thing he had ever seen. He basically urged, he also said that we have proof of their extortion and theft, so they should quit wasting everyone's time. The letter ceased. But my parents continued to annoy us by spreading the rumor that I was refusing to give them. Laya, out of resentment, they said to anybody who would listen that all they wanted to see was some individuals who were unaware of the whole story believed them. And I started getting messages on Facebook from I blocked strangers who told me to forgive my parents, that family was important, and that keeping grudges was terrible. One day, Laya asked about her grandparents and wanted to know why they were treating her so cruelly. I kept things straightforward, told her, sometimes people care more about money than family. Sometimes people make bad choices and hurt others. He nodded as though she understood, and then she asked if I thought they would ever be courteous. seemed satisfied with her response, saying, "Children are resilient." My parents tried to contact additional family members. They then convinced my Uncle Gerald to give me a call, and he said they wanted to make amends and apologized. When I asked them if they were willing to return the money they had stolen after realizing their error, he fell silent, and then he said that it was over and that we should move on. I hung up, and they said they weren't sorry because they didn't have any money. To me, Mother Mary Ann had grown to be like a real mother. She invited us to dinner every Sunday and helped. She even went to Laya's school celebrations one day when I had to work late, and she told me that she had in a letter against her wishes, she told my parents that she was leaving since they were dead to her after what they had done. She told me that to her kids and grandkids, including Laya and me, and it brought tears to my eyes. Hang-up calls from unknown numbers and harassment persisted in small ways, while my parents were in their car outside my workplace and trailing me to the supermarket while remaining sufficiently distant. They were trying to terrify me without really committing any crimes. I continued to record everything, and my notebook was filling up. The police said that it was still not enough for a restraining order because they needed proof of threats at that time. They made a mistake, and one night after drinking too much, my mother left a message saying, "I would repent destroying their lives. She said that karma will get me." She hoped Laya became ill once more so that I could comprehend how she genuinely expressed her desire for my daughter to suffer. So I immediately saved the voicemail and prepared numerous copies, which was the precise threat I required. A week later, the restraining order was issued, and my parents were instructed to remain 500 feet apart from Laya and me. There isn't any communication of any type. Third-party communication. If they violated it, the judge would arrest them. Horrified upon hearing the voicemail, describing the threat against a child as abhorrent. My parents did not even show up to challenge it. They realized that the restraining order they had in place was a mistake. Life became more peace and quiet. Less harassment, less appearances at unexpected places, and lawyers' letters stating that they were legally required to leave us alone were noted. The change immediately, saying it seemed safer. She was right. We could get there without turning around, could unwind in our own house without being concerned about unannounced guests. I discovered more about my parents via the family gossip. They lived in a studio apartment on the wrong side of town and worked at a fast food restaurant. The automobile was repossessed, and they were experiencing the same thing that I experienced for years. The only difference was that I was young and had a sick child. They were just dealing with the fallout from my own greed. Not be sorry for them. Laya's health was getting better. She was putting on weight and felt more energized. Her progress amazed the physicians, and she was even able to go back to school full-time, where she met new people and received good grades. It was amazing to watch her act like a friend after she joined the art club and discovered that she loved painting. The organization that helped us asked me to return to being a normal child, since it was all I wanted for her to be happy and healthy. I was hesitant to speak at their fundraiser, but I agreed and told a room full of donors about how the family had deserted us and how their assistance had saved my daughter's life. But strangers had come up, and while I spoke, a few people started crying. That evening, they raised more money than they had in previous years. Years later, the director said that my story had inspired others to pursue nursing as a career. Whenever my boss suggested that I become a charge nurse, it came with better hours and more money. I could finally stop working extra hours just to make ends meet and have dinner at home. I've been missing the typical mom activities for a long time, like helping her with her schoolwork and watching movies with her. Mary Ann organized a sumptuous birthday celebration for Laya that year, and the whole family attended because we were building the life we deserved. Arriving without my parents, Laya was the life of the party and relished every moment of being showered with presents. She claimed it was the best birthday ever as they played games and had an excessive amount of cake. As I saw her laughing with her cousins, I realized that this was the family that had always needed someone who truly loved us. A few months later, I ran into my father at the pharmacy, and he looked awful. slim, gray, and worn out, started to come toward me. But as he saw my hand reaching for my phone, he recalled the restraining order and simply remained there. Looking dejected for a moment, I nearly felt terrible. But then I thought of Laya I walked past the hospital. The bounced check, the voicemail threats, and the wish that she would get sick again. My mother tried one more trick without saying anything. She sent a letter to Laya's school expressing her worries about. For the benefit of her granddaughter, she accused me of being an inappropriate mother who neglected to give Laya essential. The school needed to look into Isla's medical treatment. But they had all of her medical records and could see that the principal personally called me to express his regret for the inconvenience, saying they had to investigate all issues. But he could tell that the letter violated the restraining order without merit, since I immediately filed a police report after receiving a third-party contact about us, and my parents were taken into custody. My father reprimanded my mother for sending the letter after she sobbed and that she missed their granddaughter in their apartment. They both turned against one another in front of the police, and they were charged with violating the rules during their one-night stay in jail and were given a probationary sentence. If they committed one more infraction, they would be in real time after the arrest. Total stop. Maybe they had finally come to terms with the fact that I wasn't the helpless adolescent girl they had been, controlling for so long. Perhaps they were just too exhausted to fight any longer. Whatever the cause, we didn't hear from once more. The silence was breathtaking, Laya, and I was at last able to exist without them. The extended family adapted to a new normal during this time of fear and strife, and my parents were not recognized. During gatherings, it seemed as like they never existed. A few family members continued in touch with them, but they kept it private. Urged me to forgive them more since they had seen the potential of my parents and understood the need for reconciliation. Was not feasible because certain problems cannot be fixed with a single apology. Asked me if I was upset about my parents, and I answered her that I was, as I wished I had parents who adored Ila and would have protected me. But I wasn't sorry about losing my own parents because they had been hurting us. She understood that sometimes, even if they are family members, you have to let go of toxic people after years. That an 8-year-old would have retained the house and painted Wyla's room purple to make it truly ours because it was her favorite color, and pictures of our actual family, Marianne, Tessa, Nina, and all of the donors were shown. That was our family now. The people who stood up for us when times got hard and trusted us when things got ugly. Donated without anticipating anything in return, and occasionally I worry about the teacher who initiated it all. Whether he ever thinks about the destruction he caused, but for the most part, I don't. He isn't worth your mental effort. My parents believed they had an option. They could have used the funds to offer therapy and other forms of healing to me. It's more challenging because they refused to help and instead kept it for themselves, punishing me for years. Laya was well. I had a nice career, and we managed to let go, yet the cost of a house and a real family was high, but we eventually succeeded, and my parents were content with the life they had forced upon us. There is some justice in it because they played pointless games and received pointless prizes like Reddit on me when we were thriving. Would say that in the meantime, Laya and I had achieved our independence, and I am unusually thankful for If my parents hadn't pushed so hard, I might have been controlled by them all my life, providing them with money while Laya and I was certain that I owed them for their silence. Yet their avarice ultimately freed us by exposing who they were, sincere, and gave me the strength to defend myself, so Laya and I could now build our lives without them. Genuinely, the story's conclusion. There isn't a dramatic last showdown or emotional reconciliation, just life. Without them, Laya is happy and healthy, and I was doing a job that I truly enjoyed. Two people who had discovered they would never be accepted in our lives again, as well as family that truly cared about us having a good life, is sometimes the finest way to get revenge. We were having a good life,